There comes a moment in every life when the familiar paths no longer satisfy the soul. You may have achieved what you set out to do, collected the titles, built the home, filled the calendar, but inside, there is a still, small voice whispering, "There must be something more." This moment is not a failure. It is a sacred invitation, the first quiet knock at the door of inner wisdom. Life often feels like a series of unopened doors. Some we rush past in our busy striving. Some we lock tightly because they ask us to change. Others we avoid because deep down, we fear what we might find inside. But behind each door is not a threat, not a burden, but a chance to meet yourself more fully. Not the self shaped by expectations or fears, but the deeper self, the one that has been patiently waiting beneath all the noise. We have been taught to look outward for answers, for success, for validation. But inner wisdom cannot be found in the noise of applause or the clutter of achievements. It does not scream for attention. It waits. It waits for the day we grow quiet enough, honest enough, and courageous enough to listen. Buddhist teachings remind us that true insight arises not through accumulation, but through letting go. Letting go of rigid beliefs, of the need to be right, of the fear that we are not enough. Inner wisdom is not something to be attained. It is something to be uncovered. It has always been there, like the sun hidden behind clouds, waiting for us to clear the sky. Modern psychology agrees. Researchers like Brené Brown have shown that vulnerability, the willingness to be seen, to be uncertain, is not a weakness but a doorway to strength, creativity, and authentic connection. True wisdom begins not when we declare we know, but when we humbly admit we are still learning. This journey inward does not require that we abandon our lives or retreat to mountaintops. It begins wherever we are, right now, in this breath, in this choice to open just a little wider, to soften the mind that demands certainty, and to open the heart that welcomes mystery with compassion. It is a practice, not a destination, a daily willingness to listen more deeply, to see more clearly, to live more fully. Today, we are invited to begin, to notice the walls we have built, not to shame ourselves, but to understand, to recognize the unopened doors, not as failures, but as possibilities. This journey is not about becoming someone different. It is about remembering who we already are, beyond fear, beyond pride, beyond the restless striving. The door has always been there. The key has always been in our hands. The only step now is the simplest and the most courageous, to open it. The fortress of a closed mind. In the architecture of the human spirit, nothing isolates us more profoundly than a closed mind. Like a fortress built stone by stone, it begins innocently enough, with small acts of self-protection, with quiet fears about being wrong, with the pride that grows from small victories and the comfort of certainty. Over time, these stones stack higher, the walls thicker, until what once seemed like safety becomes a prison that cuts us off from the flow of life itself. At the heart of a closed mind is fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of humiliation, fear of losing control. To shield ourselves, we cling to our ideas like armor. We convince ourselves that to change is to weaken, that to listen is to surrender, that to question is to risk everything. Yet in doing so, we unknowingly surrender something even greater, our freedom to grow, to learn, to evolve. The tragedy of a closed mind is not simply in rejecting new ideas, it is in rejecting life. For life, by its very nature, is change. In the teachings of the Buddha, clinging to fixed views, ditthi, is one of the deep roots of suffering. When we insist that we already know, that we have arrived, we block the very current of insight that would carry us closer to truth. True wisdom requires a mind that is open, fluid, willing to be reshaped by experience. Modern psychology mirrors this ancient wisdom. Carol Dweck's research on mindset reveals that when individuals adopt a fixed mindset, the belief that intelligence, character, and abilities are static, they become fragile, threatened by challenges, and quick to give up. But when we adopt a growth mindset, the belief that we can change, learn, adapt, we find resilience. We find courage. We find life unfolding in richer, more meaningful ways. Consider the difference between a fortress and a garden. A fortress is closed, hardened, defended. It admits nothing new. A garden, by contrast, is open to the elements. It weathers storms, welcomes the sun and rain alike, and in that openness, it grows, it flourishes. A closed mind seeks to be a fortress, safe and unchanging. An open mind is like a garden, vulnerable, yes, but vibrant, alive, always becoming. We often believe that a closed mind looks like stubbornness, loud opinions, or public debates. But often, it hides quietly within us. It appears in the quiet dismissal of a new idea because it feels foreign. It shows up when we silently judge another's experience as wrong because it does not fit our worldview. It whispers in moments when curiosity could arise, but instead we retreat into the safety of the known. Have you ever noticed yourself defending a belief long after you stopped believing in it, simply because it felt uncomfortable to let it go? Have you ever ignored a new perspective, not because it lacked merit, but because it challenged the identity you had built around being right? These are small stones placed in the fortress. They go unnoticed at first, but over time, they close us off not just from others, but from ourselves. The cost of maintaining a closed mind is steep. It isolates us from the wisdom of others. It stunts our personal growth. It limits our empathy, for to truly empathize is to step into another's experience, and a closed mind refuses to step outside its own. It creates loneliness wrapped in the illusion of superiority. It breeds frustration because the world refuses to conform to our expectations. And it feeds suffering because it clings to illusions rather than embracing the ever-changing dance of life. Yet there is hope. The mind, even after years of closing itself off, can open again. The first crack appears the moment we dare to admit, "I don't know everything." It deepens when we listen, not to refute or argue, but to understand. It widens when we allow ourselves to be curious again, to be humbled by the vastness of life, to delight in learning instead of fearing it. In Zen practice, the concept of beginner's mind, Shoshin, is revered. A beginner's mind approaches each moment with openness, eagerness, and lack of preconceptions, even when studying at an advanced level. It recognizes that true wisdom is not about accumulating conclusions, but about remaining spacious enough to see anew, again and again. When we choose to lower our defenses, when we meet new ideas not as threats, but as teachers, we step out of the fortress. We rejoin the living world, a world that is dynamic, mysterious, and full of unexpected grace. We rediscover the joy of connection with others, with life, and most importantly, with the ever-evolving self that dwells beyond our constructed walls. Leaving the fortress does not mean abandoning discernment. It means replacing judgment with curiosity, certainty with wonder, defense with listening. It means trusting that growth comes not from being right, but from being open. It means understanding that strength is not in the hardness of our walls, but in the resilience of our openness. As we continue this journey inward, let us remember, every brick of the fortress was laid by fear, but every act of openness is an act of courage. Each time we choose curiosity over defensiveness, humility over pride, listening over arguing, we dismantle the walls. Brick by brick, moment by moment, breath by breath, the fortress can be left behind. The world beyond it is wide, vibrant, and waiting. All it asks is the simplest, bravest gesture, to step outside and begin. The trap of blaming others. There is a quiet temptation that lives inside us all, the temptation to blame. When things go wrong, when disappointment strikes, when life feels unfair, it is so easy, so instinctive, to point the finger outward. We blame circumstances, other people, bad luck, even fate. In doing so, we find temporary relief from discomfort, a fleeting sense of righteousness. But behind that brief relief lies a deeper trap, a trap that steals our growth, poisons our relationships, and slowly erodes our connection to our true power. Blaming feels natural because it offers an escape from vulnerability. If it is someone else's fault, we don't have to confront our own limitations, our own fears, our own role in what unfolded. Blaming shields the ego from pain, but it does so by distorting reality. It places us at the center of a world that owes us fairness, recognition, perfection, an impossible fantasy that leaves us forever disappointed. In the Buddhist teachings, this habit of blaming is seen as part of the deeper delusion of self-centeredness. When we cling to the idea of a solid, separate self, we naturally view the world in terms of me versus them, my success versus their fault. This division blinds us to the interdependence of all things. It keeps us trapped in a cycle of resentment, anger, and helplessness. Modern psychology tells a similar story. Researchers like Brené Brown and Kristen Neff have shown that people who blame frequently tend to struggle with shame and self-criticism. Blame becomes a way to offload internal discomfort onto external targets. But the relief is short-lived. Over time, it fosters victimhood, a mindset where we feel powerless to change our circumstances because it's always someone else's fault. The true cost of blaming is not only external, it is deeply internal. Every time we blame, we surrender a piece of our agency. We tell ourselves a story where we are helpless passengers rather than active creators of our lives. We cut ourselves off from the very sources of growth, self-awareness, accountability, resilience. In blaming others, we abandon the opportunity to learn, to adapt, to become wiser and stronger. Think of a tree that grows crooked because of strong winds. The winds are not fair. The pressure is real, but the tree does not blame the wind. It bends, it adapts, it deepens its roots. In doing so, it becomes more resilient, more enduring. So too with us. Life's pressures and injustices are not meant to be blamed. They are invitations to deepen, to grow stronger, to awaken new capacities within us. When we blame, we remain at the surface of our experiences. We judge events as good or bad, fair or unfair, based on immediate emotional reactions. But when we step back and ask, what can this teach me? We dive deeper. We move from reaction to reflection, from helplessness to empowerment. In Zen, there is a saying, the obstacle is the path. What we resist, what we blame, may in fact be the very thing pointing us toward our next growth. But we cannot see this if we are trapped in blame. Blame locks our gaze outward, when true wisdom invites us to turn inward, not to shame ourselves, but to awaken responsibility, compassion, and clarity. Responsibility is not the same as self-blame. It is not about harsh judgment or drowning in guilt. True responsibility is a quiet strength. It says, no matter what happened, I have the power to choose my response. I have the power to learn, to heal, to move forward with wisdom. In this way, responsibility becomes liberation. It returns to us the steering wheel of our own lives. Consider a moment when you faced failure or betrayal. Perhaps it was easier, at first, to focus on who wronged you, who failed you, who let you down. But if you stayed in that place, the pain likely lingered longer than necessary. Healing came only when you shifted the question from who is to blame to how can I grow from this? That shift is the heart of the journey from suffering to freedom. Blaming is a habit, but like all habits, it can be unlearned. It begins with awareness. The next time you catch yourself blaming, whether in frustration with a colleague, irritation with a loved one, or anger at life's unfairness, pause, breathe, ask yourself, what part of this is within my power to change? What lesson might this moment be offering me? In that pause, you break the chain of reactivity. You step out of the trap. The Buddha taught that suffering is not caused by the events of life, but by our clinging, our resistance, our refusal to see things as they are. Blame is a form of resistance. It demands that reality conform to our expectations. But reality is vast, complex, mysterious. When we stop blaming, we do not become passive, we become wise. We learn to dance with life rather than fight against it. And as we practice this shift, something beautiful happens. We become more compassionate, not only with ourselves, but with others. We see that everyone, even those who hurt us, are caught in their own struggles, their own blindness. We recognize that blame does not heal wounds. Understanding does. Responsibility does. Love does. The trap of blaming is seductive, but it is not inevitable. We can choose a different path, a path of radical responsibility, of inner freedom, of mindful awakening. Each time we resist the urge to blame, we strengthen the muscles of wisdom and compassion. Each time we choose to own our response, we reclaim our lives. This journey away from blame is not easy. It requires humility, courage, and patience. But it is a path that leads not to greater bitterness, but to deeper peace. It is a path that does not end with assigning fault, but with awakening to our shared humanity and our infinite potential to grow. The next time the temptation to blame arises, remember, you are standing at a door. Behind it lies not punishment, but possibility. The choice to open that door is yours, and it leads to a life of greater freedom, greater resilience, and greater love. The illusion of superiority. Among the many traps the mind sets for itself, few are as seductive or as isolating as the illusion of superiority. It begins almost invisibly, a quiet sense that we know more, see more clearly, or are somehow more right than those around us. It feeds on comparisons, nourished by subtle judgments. I would have handled that better. I see the truth they cannot. At first, it feels empowering, a shield against self-doubt. But slowly and often, without noticing, we become prisoners of our own pride. The illusion of superiority convinces us that we are above learning, above listening, above needing to change. It freezes the mind, locking it in a static identity where growth becomes impossible. The tragedy is that in seeking to feel special, we cut ourselves off from the vast, humbling, transformative ocean of life itself. In Buddhist thought, clinging to views, ditthi, and the conceit of I am better, mana, are seen as deep sources of suffering. They create a false separation between ourselves and others, a wall that blocks true understanding and compassion. As long as we believe ourselves superior, we cannot see clearly, we cannot love fully. We are trapped in a hall of mirrors, where every reflection reinforces our own importance, but leaves us increasingly alone. Modern psychology speaks to this trap as well. Studies on what is called the Dunning-Kruger effect show that those with the least competence often overestimate their abilities the most. Meanwhile, those who are truly wise tend to underestimate their knowledge, recognizing how much remains unknown. Superiority, then, is not the mark of excellence. It is often the mark of ignorance disguised as confidence. Think about a time when you met someone who seemed convinced of their own brilliance, their own infallibility. How open were you to their message? How connected did you feel? Superiority repels. It creates distance where there might have been understanding. It sows seeds of resentment instead of trust. True connection, true influence, comes not from standing above others, but from standing beside them. Within ourselves, The illusion of superiority is often a mask for deeper fears: fear of inadequacy, fear of vulnerability, fear of being unseen. To feel better than is to shield oneself from the uncomfortable possibility that we, too, are fallible, that we, too, are learning. Yet the very vulnerability we try to avoid is the gateway to real growth, real connection, real wisdom. In Zen tradition, the beginner's mind, Shoshin, is prized above expertise. No matter how much we know, how much we have achieved, the invitation is always to return to the freshness of seeing with new eyes. A beginner's mind does not compare, it simply wonders. It asks questions rather than delivering answers. It stays humble before the mystery of life, recognizing that the vastness of what we do not know will always eclipse the small islands of what we do. Superiority blinds us. It prevents us from seeing the lessons hidden in every person, every experience, every mistake. When we believe we are above others, we cease to listen, and when we cease to listen, we stop learning. It is not our successes that cut us off from wisdom, but our arrogance about those successes. Imagine life as a river. The water that flows, that remains fresh, is the water that moves, that yields, that stays open to the landscape it travels through. The water that becomes stagnant, trapped in pools of certainty, grows cloudy and lifeless. So too with the mind. A mind that believes itself superior stops flowing. It grows stagnant, isolated, bitter. Yet there is another way. We can choose humility, not as humiliation, but as liberation. Humility says, "There is still so much I do not know." It opens the door to wonder, to deeper listening, to true empathy. It allows us to meet each person, each moment, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of curiosity and reverence. Humility does not mean devaluing ourselves. It means honoring the truth that all beings are equally navigating the mysteries of life. Some may stumble where we have strength. We will stumble where they have wisdom. The path of humility is the path of shared humanity, of mutual respect, of deep learning. The next time you feel the pull of superiority, the inner tightening that whispers, "I am better, I know more, I am right," pause. Breathe. Remember that the wisest souls do not boast of their wisdom. They bow before it. They understand that knowledge is vast, and that our grasp of it will always be partial. The Buddha, when asked about the nature of wisdom, often pointed not to accumulating answers, but to dissolving the walls of ego that separate us from life. In the end, wisdom is not about standing above others, but about standing in the river of life with open hands, open heart, and open mind. True superiority, if it exists at all, is in how gently we walk among others, how deeply we listen, how humbly we learn. It is not found in conquering others, but in conquering our need to feel above them. As we continue this journey of awakening, let us remember, the illusion of superiority is a wall we build out of fear. Humility is the bridge we build out of love. The wall isolates, the bridge connects. The wall hardens the heart, the bridge opens it. We have a choice. We can cling to the illusion of being better, or we can step into the reality of being together, imperfect, learning, growing, becoming. The choice is ours, and with that choice, a deeper wisdom awaits. The isolation of a heart without empathy. There is a kind of loneliness that does not come from being alone. It comes from being surrounded by people, by noise, by opportunities, and yet feeling utterly disconnected. This is the loneliness that grows in the absence of empathy, when the heart closes its doors to the experiences, the emotions, the realities of others. It is a subtle, silent isolation, one that often goes unnoticed until it has taken root deep within us. Empathy is not simply about feeling sorry for someone. It is not pity. It is the ability to step outside of ourselves, to feel with another, to allow their joys and sorrows to touch us. It is the bridge that connects one human heart to another, that reminds us we are not separate, not alone in our struggles, not alone in our dreams. Without empathy, we become islands, self-contained, self-protecting, slowly eroding beneath the waves of misunderstanding and alienation. In Buddhist teachings, empathy arises naturally from compassion, karuna, and the understanding of interbeing, that all things are connected, that no life stands alone. When we see ourselves as fundamentally separate, we harden. We turn inward in fear, in judgment, in indifference. But when we recognize that another's suffering is not foreign to us, but intimately bound to our own, a door opens in the heart. Modern psychology confirms what ancient wisdom has long known. Researchers like Daniel Goleman have shown that emotional intelligence, the capacity to empathize, to understand and respond to emotions, is a key predictor of success, not just professionally, but personally, relationally, spiritually. Those who lack empathy may achieve short-term victories, but they lose the deeper rewards: trust, loyalty, belonging. The isolation of a heart without empathy does not happen all at once. It builds gradually. It starts with small dismissals: the coworker whose stress we overlook, the friend whose sadness we brush aside, the stranger's pain we turn away from because it feels inconvenient. Each act of turning away adds another brick to the wall. Over time, the heart grows quieter, colder, more defensive. We mistake independence for strength, detachment for wisdom. But real strength is found not in hardening the heart, but in keeping it soft amid a hard world. Without empathy, our relationships grow shallow. Conversations become transactions. Conflicts become battles to win rather than wounds to heal. Joy becomes a solitary achievement rather than a shared celebration. Life itself begins to lose its depth, its texture, its meaning. The colors fade to gray, the music becomes noise, and the warmth of connection dims into a vague memory. Yet the human heart is resilient. No matter how thick the walls, no matter how long the isolation, the capacity for empathy remains. It is never lost, only buried. It can be uncovered again through simple, radical acts of presence, by truly listening when someone speaks, by pausing to imagine what a stranger's day might have been like, by choosing again and again to let the reality of another life matter to us. Empathy is a practice, not a trait. It grows through attention, intention, and humility. It asks us to move beyond our own story, to recognize that every person we meet is carrying burdens we cannot see, dreams we cannot guess, pains we will never fully understand. It asks us to remember that suffering and joy are universal, even if their expressions are different. Have you ever noticed how a small act of genuine empathy, a glance, a kind word, a moment of real listening, can change the atmosphere of a room? How it can soften anger, dissolve tension, invite healing? This is not magic. It is the natural response of hearts recognizing themselves in each other. It is the deep wisdom that says, "I am not separate from you. Your life touches mine." The Buddha taught that true compassion is not sentimental. It is fierce, courageous, unwavering. It sees suffering clearly and chooses to meet it with love rather than indifference. Empathy is the first step on this path. It is the willingness to be touched by another's life, to risk being moved, to allow the defenses of superiority, indifference, and judgment to fall away. To cultivate empathy is to dismantle the illusion of separateness. It is to awaken to the reality that our lives are woven together in ways too deep, too mysterious, too beautiful to fully comprehend. In seeing another's pain, we begin to heal our own. In celebrating another's joy, we expand our own. The path back from the isolation of a heart without empathy is not complicated, but it is challenging. It asks us to slow down, to notice, to listen, to care. It asks us to resist the impulse to protect ourselves from feeling too much, and instead to trust that the heart, though tender, is strong enough to bear the truth of connection. When empathy returns, so too does life. Colors brighten, music regains its melody, conversations deepen, relationships mend. The sense of belonging, once lost, flows back like a long-missed river finding its way home. The next time you find yourself withdrawing from someone's pain or dismissing their experience because it feels uncomfortable or foreign, pause, breathe. Remember that empathy is not about fixing others. It is about being willing to walk beside them. It is about saying, without words, you are not alone. The walls that isolation built can be dismantled, not through grand gestures, but through small, everyday acts of presence and compassion. And as they fall, what remains is something stronger than protection, connection, a heart that beats not just for itself, but with and for the world. This is the heart of awakening, not standing apart from life, but standing fully within it, hands open, heart open, eyes open to the shared beauty, the shared struggle, the shared mystery of being human. The fear that shackles growth. Fear is one of the most powerful forces in human life. It can protect us, alert us to danger, and sharpen our instincts. But when fear goes unchecked, when it grows in the hidden corners of our mind, it can become a shackle, a chain that binds us to the familiar, the safe, and the stagnant. Fear, when it is not seen clearly, quietly convinces us that the risk of change is greater than the cost of staying the same. We often think of fear as something dramatic, the racing heart before a big decision, the trembling before a great leap. But the most dangerous fear is quieter. It whispers in the back of our minds, weaving stories of inadequacy, failure, rejection. It tells us that it is better not to try, better not to hope, better not to open ourselves to the unknown. It promises safety, but delivers regret. In Buddhist teachings, fear arises from attachment to comfort, to identity, to certainty. The more tightly we cling, the more terrified we become of anything that threatens our grip. We build our lives around what feels predictable, erecting invisible walls against the unpredictable flow of life. In doing so, we trade the dynamic adventure of living for the static illusion of control. Modern psychology mirrors this understanding. Researchers like Carol Dweck have shown that a fixed mindset, a belief that our abilities, our worth, our identities are set and fragile, makes us fear failure, fear criticism, fear the discomfort of learning. A growth mindset, by contrast, embraces uncertainty as the soil in which new strength can grow. It understands that mistakes are not verdicts, but invitations. When we are shackled by fear, growth becomes impossible. We avoid the conversations that could heal. We reject the opportunities that could expand us. We silence the dreams that stir within us, telling ourselves that now is not the right time, that later will be safer, that risk is too costly. But in doing so, we slowly suffocate the very parts of ourselves that long to live most fully. The irony is that avoiding change does not protect us from pain. It simply trades one kind of pain for another. The pain of regret is quieter, slower, but far more enduring than the sharp pang of effort or failure. At least when we try, we grow. When we stagnate, we decay. Think of a river. If it stops moving, it becomes stagnant, clouded, lifeless. So too with the spirit. Life is movement, change, unfolding. To fear this movement is to fear life itself. Have you ever noticed how many of your greatest memories, your greatest lessons, came from moments that first terrified you? Stepping into the unknown, risking rejection, daring to love, daring to dream. These were not free of fear. They were filled with it. But you moved anyway. And because you did, you became more than you were before. Fear is not the enemy. It is a signpost. It shows us where we are holding back, where we are clinging, where we are being called to grow. Fear points to the very places where courage is needed most. In Zen tradition, fear is not banished but embraced. It is seen as part of the landscape of awakening. The way to transcend fear is not to fight it, but to see through it, to recognize its stories, to bow to its presence without being ruled by it, and to step forward anyway, one breath, one step at a time. The Buddha taught that freedom lies not in escaping fear, but in understanding it, in seeing that fear is a natural response of a mind that clings, and that by loosening our grasp, by trusting in the impermanence and interconnection of all things, we can move with fear rather than against it. The practice, then, is simple but not easy. Notice the fear. Name it. Honor it without obeying it. Then move forward anyway, even if only by a single step. Consider the tree that bends in the storm. It does not pretend there is no wind. It does not resist the gale with rigid pride. It yields, it moves, it dances with the forces around it. And in doing so, it survives, it grows stronger, its roots sinking deeper into the earth. We, too, are invited to bend rather than break, to dance rather than resist. Fear can be our teacher if we allow it to be, not by obeying its warnings without question, but by listening for the deeper lessons it offers. When fear says, "You cannot," we can ask, "Why not?" When fear says, "You are not ready," we can whisper back, "I will never be fully ready," and that's okay. When fear says, "Stay small," we can gently reply, "I was not born to remain hidden." Each act of courage, however small, loosens the shackles. Each time we step forward into uncertainty, we teach our hearts that fear is not a wall, but a threshold. And with each step, the world opens wider, richer, more alive. It is important to remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to act in the presence of it. The warrior of wisdom is not fearless. The warrior of wisdom is one who has befriended fear, who has learned to move with trembling hands and a pounding heart, trusting that growth lies on the other side. The next time fear rises within you, when you hesitate to speak your truth, to try something new, to open your heart, pause. Place a hand gently over your heart. Acknowledge the fear. Thank it for its concern. Then, ask yourself, what does love invite me to do? And move toward that. Love, not fear, is the true guide of growth. Where fear builds walls, love builds bridges. Where fear closes doors, love opens windows. Where fear shackles, love liberates. Growth asks us to befriend discomfort, to trust in our own resilience, to step into the vast mystery of life even when it feels safer to stay small. And every time we choose growth over fear, we reclaim a little more of ourselves. We step a little closer to the person we are meant to become. The path of growth is not easy, but it is beautiful. And it begins, always, with a single, trembling, courageous step. The wisdom of listening. In a world so eager to speak, to broadcast, to assert, there is a quiet power that often goes unnoticed, the power of listening. True listening is not merely the act of hearing words. It is a deep, living engagement with another being. It is the willingness to step outside of our own thoughts, our own agendas, and meet another where they are. In this meeting, wisdom is born. Most of us are trained from a young age to speak well, to argue persuasively, to make ourselves heard. But we are rarely taught to listen. Listening is often seen as passive, as secondary. Yet in truth, listening requires more strength, more patience, and more humility than speaking. To listen is to set aside the armor of certainty and enter the vulnerable space of true connection. The Buddha taught that wise speech is preceded by wise listening. In order to know what words are needed, if any at all, we must first be fully present with what is being shared. Listening in this way is an act of love, of respect, of non-attachment. It does not rush to fix, to judge, to advise. It simply bears witness to the living reality of another. Modern psychology echoes this ancient truth. Researchers like Carl Rogers, the founder of person-centered therapy, emphasize that unconditional positive regard, the ability to listen without judgment or agenda, is one of the most healing forces in human relationships. When we are truly listened to, we feel seen. We feel valued. We feel less alone. Yet deep listening is rare and difficult. Our minds are restless. We rehearse our responses while the other person speaks. We seek points to agree with or argue against. We filter everything through the narrow lens of our own experience. In doing so, we do not really hear. We merely wait for our turn. Have you ever noticed how profoundly different it feels when someone listens to you with full presence? When their attention does not wander, when they are not impatiently waiting to insert their own story. It is a rare and precious gift. It is also a gift we can offer others and ourselves. Listening opens doors that argument and persuasion can never touch. It softens defenses. It builds trust. It reveals layers of meaning that lie beneath the surface of words. Often, when we truly listen, we discover that what is being said is not merely about the facts being shared. It is about the longing to be understood, the fear of being invisible, the hope that connection is still possible. Listening, too, is a practice. It is an intentional slowing down. It is a letting go of the need to be right, to be clever, to be impressive. It is the choice to be present over being perfect. And in this presence, a deeper wisdom emerges. Not the wisdom of knowing all the answers, but the wisdom of understanding the questions more fully. In Zen practice, the beginner's mind applies not only to seeing, but also to listening. A beginner's mind approaches each moment without the armor of preconception, without the shield of expertise. It listens as if hearing for the first time. It allows wonder, curiosity, and humility to guide the heart. When we listen in this way, we also listen to life itself. We become attuned to the subtle rhythms around us, the sorrow beneath anger, the vulnerability behind bravado, the shared humanity behind difference. Listening reveals the interconnection we often forget. It teaches us that every voice, no matter how different from our own, carries echoes of our shared existence. The fear that prevents us from listening is the fear of being changed. To truly listen is to risk being moved, to risk discovering that our assumptions were incomplete, our certainties fragile. It requires courage to sit with discomfort, to allow another's truth to touch our carefully guarded hearts. But it is precisely this willingness that makes wisdom possible. True wisdom is not rigid. It is not defensive. It is supple, responsive, open to being reshaped by life. It grows not from accumulating facts, but from cultivating presence, compassion, and understanding. Listening also teaches us about ourselves. When we notice the moments we resist listening, when we rush to defend, to interrupt, to explain, we see the places where our egos cling most tightly. In these moments, we are given an invitation to soften, to stay, to listen more deeply not only to the other, but also to the reactive parts within ourselves. The path of listening is not about passivity. It is about active, courageous engagement with the world. It is about choosing to value connection over control, understanding over dominance, presence over performance. It is a radical act of faith in the goodness and complexity of life. When we choose to listen, we honor the sacredness of the other person's journey. We say, without words, your story matters. Your experience is real. You are not alone. In doing so, we heal the silent wounds of isolation that so many carry. Listening, in its truest form, is a spiritual practice. It reminds us that wisdom is not something we impose upon the world. It is something we uncover together in the spaces between our words, the next time you find yourself in conversation, pause. Notice the impulse to speak, to correct, to impress. Breathe. Open your heart. Ask yourself, am I truly listening? And if not, gently return to presence. Each act of listening is a step toward deeper wisdom, deeper compassion, deeper awakening. In listening, we not only honor others, we also honor the quiet, resilient wisdom that lives within us all. The awakening. Choosing the path of wisdom. There comes a moment, sometimes quietly, sometimes with the force of a storm, when we realize that the life we have been living is too small for the spirit within us. A moment when the walls we built for protection have become prisons, when the habits we thought kept us safe now hold us back, when the familiar begins to feel like a cage. It is in this moment that awakening begins, not as a grand explosion, but as a simple, undeniable recognition. There must be more. Awakening is not about achieving perfection. It is not about becoming someone else. It is about remembering who we have always been beneath the layers of fear, pride, blame, and illusion. It is the soft, persistent call of wisdom that has been speaking all along, patiently waiting for us to listen. Choosing the path of wisdom is choosing a different way of being in the world. It is choosing openness over rigidity, curiosity over certainty, compassion over judgment. It is choosing to see each challenge not as an obstacle to resent, but as an invitation to grow. It is choosing to walk through life not armored, but awake. The teachings of the Buddha remind us that suffering arises from ignorance, from not seeing clearly the nature of ourselves, of others, of life itself. Wisdom is the light that dissolves ignorance. It reveals that we are not isolated islands, but waves of the same vast ocean. It teaches us that everything is impermanent, that clinging leads to pain, and that letting go opens the way to freedom. But wisdom does not come from theory. It comes from living. It comes from the willingness to meet life as it is, not as we wish it to be. It comes from the courage to face our own minds with honesty and tenderness. It grows each time we choose presence over distraction, truth over comfort, compassion over fear. In modern psychology, we find echoes of this truth. Researchers like Viktor Frankl have shown that meaning and growth emerge not from avoiding suffering, but from how we respond to it. Life inevitably brings pain, uncertainty, and loss. But within these experiences lies the opportunity to awaken deeper capacities for resilience, love, and insight. The path of wisdom is not linear. It is not a straight line from ignorance to enlightenment. It is a spiral, a dance, a constant returning. We will stumble. We will forget. We will fall back into old patterns. But each time we notice, each time we return to awareness, we strengthen the roots of wisdom within us. Awakening does not mean escaping life's challenges. It means meeting them with a different spirit, with the calm of a mind that no longer clings, the compassion of a heart that no longer judges, the courage of a soul that no longer hides. When we choose the path of wisdom, we become students of life. Every moment becomes a teacher. The difficult person becomes a lesson in patience. The disappointment becomes a lesson in non-attachment. The failure becomes a lesson in humility. Even our own pain becomes a doorway into deeper understanding. Choosing wisdom is not a one-time decision. It is a daily practice, a moment-to-moment choice. It is choosing to breathe when anger rises, to pause when judgment stirs, to listen when ego wants to speak. It is choosing to stay open when fear says to close. It is choosing to love when it would be easier to withdraw. And perhaps most of all, it is choosing to see ourselves and others with gentle eyes. To recognize that we are all works in progress, all stumbling toward the light in our own imperfect ways. It is choosing kindness over cynicism, hope over despair, connection over isolation. The world often teaches us that power comes from domination, from being louder, smarter, faster. But wisdom teaches a different kind of power, the power of humility, the power of presence, the power of compassion. True power is not found in controlling others, but in mastering ourselves. As we awaken, we begin to see that the barriers we perceive between ourselves and others were illusions all along. We see that every being carries wounds, hopes, fears, and dreams not so different from our own. We see that kindness is not weakness, but strength. We see that vulnerability is not shameful, but sacred. The path of wisdom asks us to live with open hearts and open hands. It invites us to give more than we take, to listen more than we speak, to love more than we fear. It reminds us that the measure of our lives is not how much we accumulate, but how deeply we connect, how bravely we grow, how generously we love. Through recognizing the fortress of a closed mind, through releasing blame, through letting go of superiority, through reopening the heart to empathy, through facing our fears, and through learning the sacred art of listening, we have walked together on a journey of remembrance. A journey not toward becoming someone new, but toward reclaiming who we have always been. This journey is not easy. There will be days when fear feels stronger than hope, when old patterns resurface, when the voice of doubt grows loud. But even then, the invitation remains. Even then, the path is still beneath our feet. Every breath is a chance to begin again. Every moment is a doorway back to presence. Every act of awareness, no matter how small, is a step toward awakening. You are not alone on this path. Every soul who has ever longed for truth, for freedom, for love walks beside you. Their courage lights the way, and your courage, too, becomes a light for others. As we come to the end of this reflection, remember, awakening is not a destination. It is a way of moving through life, with eyes open to wonder, with a heart open to love, with a mind open to learning. If this journey has touched something within you, I invite you to continue walking this path with us. Subscribe to this channel, share this message with someone who may need it, and explore the other reflections waiting for you. Each step, each breath, each moment is a new beginning. The door has always been there. The key has always been within you. Now, with courage and tenderness, open it and step forward into the life you were always meant to live.